All right, friends, welcome back. We're going to be reading chapters 3 and 4 of The Star Fisher today by Lawrence Yep. And if you remember what happened in those first two chapters, Joan Lee is the young girl who moves with her family, and they have come to a brand new place, and they're going to West Virginia. They did live in Ohio, and they get there, and it seems like some people are happy to see them and some people aren't. So we're going to read a little bit more about them. Where we last left off is Joan and her siblings were going to see Miss Lucy, their landlord, and then they noticed that there was smoke coming from the house, or the place where they were going to make their house, the old school. So let's start with chapter 3. I burst through Miss Lucy's doorway and out into the courtyard. "Papa! Papa!" I shouted. Flailing her hands at the smoke, Mama stumbled out of the laundry. "Papa's all right," she said, and then added, "and so am I." I caught Mama before she could stumble into Miss Lucy's vegetable patch. Were you cooking?" Mama tried to answer, but she began to cough, so she could only nod her head. Bobby and Emily had come running over by then. "Take care, Mama," I ordered, and then turned toward the laundry. Running into the smoking house wasn't my idea of fun, but I wanted to make sure about Papa. But then he appeared in the rear doorway with a towel in his hands. "It's crackers and water tonight," he announced, and began to wave the towel. Bobby was busy patting Mama on the back to help her lungs get rid of the smoke. "Again?" Mama's face had turned tomato red in her embarrassment. "Again," she rasped hoarsely. Miss Lucy came out of her kitchen with a bucket full of water, hurrying as best as she could with the heavy load. She sloshed water accidentally onto her apron. "Is it a fire, Miss Lee?" And draping the towel over his shoulders, Papa went over to Mama, who was standing up on her own now. "No need," he said in English, but he always had trouble pronouncing American words. Miss Lucy staggered across the courtyard under the heavy weight of the bucket. "Excuse me, what did you say?" Signing to Bobby to help Miss Lucy, Papa repeated himself more slowly. "No need. Everything, hunky-dory." As Bobby took the bucket from Miss Lucy, she wiped her damp apron. "And is this your wife, Mr. Lee?" "Yes." "Mrs. Lee?" Taking Mama's elbow, Papa turned her around. "And these are my children." Next he introduced Bobby, because he was a boy. Papa could be very traditional sometimes. It didn't go unnoticed by Miss Lucy, and when he tried to introduce me, Miss Lucy simply smiled. "Oh, we've met already." She nodded to Emily. "And also this young lady." "Yes." Papa was a little puzzled, but he waved his hands at the white-haired lady with the wet apron. "This is our landlady," he said in Chinese. "Miss Lucy." Miss Lucy peered at the kitchen cautiously as a wisp of smoke drifted outward. "What happened?" Mama's tongue struggled to form the words. Young." However, the explanation was beyond Mama's few words of English, so she looked over at me for the help, and it's the way that she always did in these situations. I was used to it by now. "Mama," I explained, "was the youngest in her family, so no one bothered to teach her how to cook." The vegetable patch caught Miss Lucy's eye. As if she didn't want to waste the water, she took the bucket back from Bobby and began to empty the bucket carefully along its even rows. "Then you'll just have to come and have dinner with me." "Oh, boy," Emily said. I had to agree with her sentiments. If Miss Lucy cooking was anything like her cookie baking, well, we were in for a feast. I was just thinking that some good might have come out of the fire after all, but Papa wagged his hands back and forth. No, he said. "It's the neighborly thing to do," Miss Lucy said. As a ribbon of smoke floated by her face, her eyes followed it. "And maybe I'll teach Miss Lee a few simple things to cook, too." And suddenly she clapped a hand over her mouth. "Oh, my stars, will you listen to me chatter on? Once a teacher, always a teacher," she laughed. It was a young laugh, so I knew it came from deep inside her. Mama seemed encouraged by the merry sound, and she glanced at me. Once I had translated for her, Mama frowned in puzzlement. Why does she want to do that? We're perfect strangers. At the same time that Mama had been speaking in Chinese, Miss Lucy was speaking in English. I ought to be ashamed of myself. I shouldn't pester people like this. When people did that, it sometimes made me feel as dizzy as a spinning top. It took a moment to translate for both of them. When everything was sorted out, Mama rubbed her chin with her thumb. "What's that woman up to?" she asked me suspiciously. "Is she trying to find out how much that we have so that she can raise the rent?" "She's not up to anything, Mama," I said indignantly. Miss Lucy smiled apologetically. "I guess I still enjoy teaching." I was waiting just in case Miss Lucy had anything else to say, but Mama nudged me in the ribs. "What did she say?" Sometimes Mama expected me to read her mind as to what she wanted. Annoyed, I rubbed my side as I told Mama what Miss Lucy had said. As soon as I was finished, though, Papa stiffened. "No." Emily pivoted on her heel. "But Papa," she started to protest. If anyone could get something from Papa, it was Emily. But Papa shook his head again. "No." He looked at Emily, but we knew his words were for all of us. "If anyone will teach my family, it will be me. I am the teacher," he added bitterly. "Or should have been." And then we knew that it wasn't any use. Papa didn't make up his mind often, but when he did, it was like trying to stop a locomotive. Still, Mama tried to put the best face on and waited for more. "And it's so late," she said, and elbowed me in annoyance when I waited. So I kept on translating while Mama spoke in Chinese, smiling all the while. "And we've had such a long trip, so if you don't mind, we'll postpone the lessons." Miss Lucy seemed disappointed. "I'll give you a rain check, then." I tried to translate Miss Lucy's reply for Mama, but stumbled over rain check. "I don't know those words," I had to confess to Miss Lucy. Miss Lucy pantomimed, slapping her own wrist with a ruler. "That's what I get for being so slangy. A rain check is what you get when a baseball game is rained on. It may be a receipt or just your ticket stub." Bobby looked in awe at Miss Lucy. For the longest time in Ohio, he'd been wanting to see the Canton Bulldogs, but paying good money to see grown-up men play games had been beyond both Mama and Papa. "Well, I might have been," Miss Lucy said, with a cat that ate the canary smile. Mama chaffed during the short delay and plucked at my sleeve, which was her shorthand way of telling me to get on with it. Papa, of course, eavesdropped while I gave a brief explanation to Mama, and Miss Lucy seemed to drop even more in his estimation. When he had said our goodbyes, we went back inside the laundry. There was a small cook stove, a table, some chairs, and a blackened pot. There were times when Mama couldn't even boil water, even though she tried her hardest. Mama went straight to her American-style purse on the table and carefully counted out some pennies. "I saw a store on the way here. Take your sister," she said to Bobby, "and get some crackers for dinner." We could hear Bobby's stomach growling, wanting more substantial fare, but he knew better than to argue. "Yes, Mama." But when he tried to take Emily's hand, she pulled away stubbornly. "No, I don't want to go anywhere." Mama just kept staring into her purse. I knew a storm was brewing, and I didn't want Emily to see. "Go with Bobby, Emily." And something in my tone must have warned Emily, because to my relief she shut up and took Bobby's hand, and I found some steel wool, and I started on the pot. The front door had no sooner closed than Mama snapped her purse shut. "What's the matter with you?" she asked Papa. I'm sorry I ruined dinner. But that's no reason for the children to go hungry." However, Papa, who was usually so mild-mannered, closed the door and swore. "The idea of a woman calling herself a teacher! What does she know? How can you write great poetry, great novels, great thoughts, and that gobble-gobble talk of the Americans?" Mama rounded on Papa. "You're the one who wanted to come to the land of the Golden Mountain." Mama used the fancy name for America. Papa clenched his fist in frustration. "There was nothing for me at home, nothing. I waited for years for the Manchus to be gone, and then, when they are, they set up a republic, and the republic abolished the scholarship exams in its almighty wisdom." For almost 3 centuries, a group of barbarians had held the dragon throne, but 16 years ago, they had been chased out finally. Mama refused to be intimidated. "It's a Western-style republic, and they want people with Western ideas. Well, you're here now, so learn some of them." "You're just as bad as the rest of them." Papa flung out a hand angrily. You'd turn your back on 4,000 years of tradition and learning. The empire is gone, Mama said. It's a new age. For millennia, men had to study the classics and pass exams on them in order to gain a government post. It was thought that men who could best understand the wisdom of the ages could best serve the people. Yes, Papa agreed. It used to be fragrant ink, stinking money. It was a proverb that Papa had once explained. A scholar has ink sticks in which little scent had been mixed, but a merchant only handles dirty, greasy money. It's an age where people of talent have to dig ditches. And he held up his hands. I was famous for my calligraphy, and now look at these hands after being in tubs of hot water for years. Mama looked up at him, eye to eye. You're a merchant now, not a scholar. Papa lowered his hands gloomily. With nothing but debts to pay. He stormed past Mama abruptly and went out into the hallway. Mama just stood there, staring at the wall. When we heard him rummaging around among the suitcases, Mama called out, Your books are in the brown suitcase. Where did you pack my ink sticks and brushes? Papa called sullenly. They're in the black suitcase with the abacus, Mama said. And the other business things? Papa said angrily. Yes, Mama called, though she shouldn't have. The only response was a door slamming. Papa will need water to mix with his ink. Mama found an old dusty cup on a shelf and gave it to me. Wash this out and then bring him some. I'll do the pot. I began to wash my soot-blackened right hand. I don't think I can scrape out that last layer of rice. It's like charcoal. I'll get it out. Mama took the pot. I've had a lot of practice. Just make sure you bring the water to Papa. He always feels better when he's written a poem. I found a rag and I wiped my hands off. Yes, Mama. Mama moved over just a little so that I could wash out the cup. Outside we could hear the quick patter of shoes, and Emily came in through the back door with a package under her arm. Bobby says to go ahead without him. Mama turned around from the sink. But he must be hungry. A loud man's voice rolled into the laundry like an ugly little porcupine. When another man joined him in harsh laughter, Emily pressed her lips together tightly. Bobby's busy. It can wait. Mama went back to scrubbing the pot. It's our first meal in our new home. Emily refused to look at either of us. Bobby has to clean up something. Suddenly, over the ugly laughter outside, we could hear Bobby shouting in Chinese. You're bad, bad men. And when he got angry, Bobby sometimes forgot what language he was using. Stay here, Mama said to us, and she patted the air as if she were placing an invisible wall to shut us in. Whirling around, she began to run down the hallway. A door opened, and we heard Papa ask, What's going on? I don't know, I said, and Papa chased after Mama. I looked at Emily, and she looked at me, and then we both charged after Mama and Papa. When we thundered through the front door, we found Mama outside the gate, holding Bobby, while Papa wrung the excess moisture from a handkerchief that I recognized as Bobby's. He must have wet it in the rain barrel under the roof gutters. Even as we stepped outside, Papa began to wash furiously at something on the front of the fence. Mama looked over Bobby's head at Papa. Paint is the only way to get that off. Papa gritted his teeth in frustration. I know. Mama beckoned me over and then gestured at the fence. Tell me what this says. Bobby, however, already knew the words. He clung to Mama. It says, go home. And he added a bad word. Mama raised both arms protectively like a hen with her chicks. I found myself pressing myself against her along with Emily, while Mama lowered her arms around us and held us tight. Want us to read it to you? Came a shout from across the street. Across the street was Mr. Snuff from the railroad depot. With him was a man lean as a fence railing. They were both laughing as they lounged along the brick wall of a church, but there was a mean, lazy look to them, as if they knew they were bigger and stronger than anyone else on the block. Still squatting on the sidewalk, Papa whirled around. You do this! Mr. Snuff stood straight up as he spread out his arms in an elaborate show of innocence. Did you see any paint? Emily shoved Mama away angrily. Better go back to school if you ever did. Home is spelled H-O-M-E, not H-O-O-M. Mr. Snuff straightened. You calling me ignorant? I don't have to, Emily jeered. You already are. Papa shot to his feet. Get her inside. Mama already had her hand over Emily's mouth and was dragging her back towards the laundry. Get inside, Papa said urgently. The gate banged behind him as he waved the wet handkerchief at us. Behind us, the two men had begun to swagger away, singing a rude song. We could hear them dimly through the thick door after Papa had closed it. With his back pressed against the door, he looked at us. What have I gotten us into? Well, you couldn't know, Mama said. In the face of the new threat, their old quarrel was quite forgotten. I'm not afraid of them, Emily said defiantly. Well, you should be, Papa said. Chinese have been lynched for less than that. He squatted down before Emily. Don't forget the old proverb. The nail that sticks out gets hammered. Oh, I'll hammer them, Emily growled. Despite all his worries, Papa had to smile. Of course you will, but first have some dinner. He draped the wet handkerchief over the knob of the front door. I'm going to study now. Joan will bring you a plate, Mama said. I'll need some water, too, Papa said, as he bounced back to his feet. He bolted the door and then headed back for the room that he was using temporarily as a study. Mama put her arms around us and ushered us down the hall. Make sure you bring 2 cups of water to Papa, she instructed me. 1 cup for drinking and 1 cup for his ink. I have a feeling that he'll have to write a lot of poetry tonight. Chapter 4. When we had finished our supper, we helped Mama unpack, which helped take her minds off the day's events. There was something exciting about moving into a new house, as if we were explorers in a different country, and this house was more unusual than most, with high ceilings and walls with old angular markings from the paintings, charts and chalkboards that they had once borne. In the very front of the building, Papa had finished knocking together a crude counter, though he stenciled sides of wood scraps needed to be painted over, and there were shelves behind the counter. In the next room, Papa had already set up 2 ironing shelves out of wooden planks, and we got out the irons, the watering bottles, and the starch while Mama set up her pedal-run sewing machine. The third room was for drying, so Papa had strung clotheslines back and forth, and there was more rope up than he had ever used in Ohio, as if he expected more laundry. Above the lines, strung in even rows, far out of reach, was the tall ceiling with the molding. Desks and chalkboards had long since been carted away, but we could see the marks on the floors and the walls, and though the rooms had been washed and dusted, they still smelled of chalk and glue. A wood-burning stove squatted in one corner like a squat black bug. I suppose that the school hadn't been fully converted into gas, and the stove had been kept to heat the classroom in the winter. In Papa's methodical way, he had stacked kindling and wood beside it, ready to dry all the loads of laundry that would come. The room next to the kitchen room was the washing room, where the wringing machine was already assembled. With a hammer, Mama opened the crate, and we unpacked the heavy laundry soap and the rest of our things, and then we wrung the washboards out like soldiers, preparing for the great battle the next day against the forces of filth. Papa had told me that one time that the washboard was a Chinese invention that we had brought to America, though I don't know about that. Beneath the windows sat the row of big metal washtubs, gaping like so many empty frogs. Ah, here it is, Mama said. From one crate she brought out a small brass bell covered with flowery decorations and mottos in Chinese. We followed her in a procession back to the front door. Papa had already prepared the hook over the doorway, and I picked up Emily in my arms, and when Mama had given her the bell, Emily hung it up so that when the front door opened, it would make the bell ring. Now we're really settled in, Emily said. As the sun set, Mama began to turn on the gas jets in the house. They were little pipes that stuck out of the walls, and when you lit them, the gas burned, giving off light. In the kitchen, next to the washing room, we finished taking the rest of Mama's things out of the crates, including the rice and some salted vegetables. When we can eat real food tomorrow, Mama declared. When we had done what we could downstairs, I got the bags that Emily and I had been carrying, and I took them upstairs. Together, 4 of us put together the bed that Emily and I used, and I placed it next to the window. Our dresser was already there, with a cracked mirror in the frame above it. Next to it was a chair. And here it is, Mama said. From one crate she brought out a small brass bell covered with flowery decorations and mottos in Chinese. We followed her in a procession back to the front door. Papa had already prepared the hook over the doorway, and I picked up Emily in my arms, and when Mama had given her the bell, Emily hung it up so that when the front door opened it would make the bell ring. "Now we're really settled in," Emily said. As the sun set, Mama began to turn on the gas jets in the house. They were little pipes that stuck out of the wall, and when you lit them, the gas burned, giving off light. In the kitchen, next to the washing room, we finished taking the rest of Mama's things out of the crates, including the rice and some salted vegetables. "Now we can eat real food tomorrow." And when we had done what we would downstairs, I got the bags that Emily and I had been carrying and took them upstairs. Together, 4 of us put together the bed that Emily and I used and placed it next to the window. Our dresser was already there with a cracked frame above it, and next to it was a chair. In our old home, our things were pretty well crammed in the tiny room that we had, but everything looked a bit lost in that classroom. Mama sent Bobby off to bed while she and I helped Emily get into her night clothes. As she brushed out Emily's hair, Mama turned Emily toward the gas light and pointed meaningfully toward it. "Remember, play with the gas jet, and the gas might come into the house and choke you, or blow up the whole house, and you'll get back to Ohio even sooner than you want." Then, as she put us to bed, she told us a couple of stories about children who had played with the gas jets and died particularly gruesome deaths. As she tucked the quilt up around our necks, she looked down at Emily sternly. "And," she declared, "it all happened because bad children disobeyed their parents." She stroked the hair out of Emily's eyes. "Now, good night." Mama went over to the gas jets and pointed at it again. "What did I say about these things when we lived in Ohio?" she asked Emily. Emily would have kept a stubborn silence if I hadn't elbowed her. "Only you and Joan and Papa can turn it off," she mumbled. With a nod of her head, Mama turned down the gas jet so that the light went out. When Mama was gone, I felt Emily's tiny elbow in my side. "Joan!" "What?" I mumbled sleepily. Emily was lying on her side, looking up the wall where the gas jet was. "Do you think Mama would tell a fib?" The pillow felt so soft at that moment that I just murmured, "She doesn't want you to play with the gas jets. Now good night." As we lay there, I could hear the old building talking to itself. Out in the hallway, old boards creaked. Something rattled in a room below. The bed shook as Emily turned towards me for protection, but she took in her breath so sharply that I made the mistake of asking, "What's wrong?" In the dim light coming in from the street, Emily's eyes looked very wide. "There's a tree. I can see its shadow on the shade. It's got these long, bony arms that are moving," she clutched at me. "I think it's trying to get us." "Don't look at it then," putting a hand on her shoulder. I shoved her back onto her back. She lay there for a moment, and then announced, "This is even worse. Now I can't see anything. I can just hear it." And when the wind made the tree branches beat against the window, Emily scurried under the quilt. "Now it's trying to get us." "Emily, come out of there before you suffocate." Exasperated, I tried to drag the quilt back down from her head. Emily, though, had a death grip on it. "If there are any monsters there," her voice came muffled through the quilt, "you want someone big like Joan, not someone small like me." It took both hands, but I managed to get Emily's head back into the open air. "Now, no more shenanigans," I scolded her. "Go to sleep." When I lay back down again, the pillow felt as soft as ever, but I wasn't too long before Emily poked me again. I tried to push her away without looking and waved my hand vaguely in the air. "Go away. I don't like it here," Emily insisted. "That's nice," I murmured drowsily. "This place is worse than a jail. It's a trap." I tried to ignore her, but every now and then those little pronouncements would sprout from Emily. "I keep hearing the tree moving." A moment later, "It's coming in." And after a minute, "Joni, I can't sleep." "I can," I mumbled. "I'm scared," she complained. "The tree's moving." "It's just the wind," I muttered into my pillow. Emily snuggled up against me. "It's going to get us." Once Emily's imagination got going, it was hard to stop it. With a sigh, I rolled over onto my side to look at her, but Emily had buried her head underneath the quilt again. "No, the tree sounds just like the ocean." Emily lowered the quilt to stare at me accusingly. "You've never been to the ocean." "Well, neither have you. So how do you know it doesn't sound like the ocean? Come on, we'll make it like spoons." I rolled Emily over on her side so that her back was to me. Then I held her against me tight. "If I tell you a story, will you let me sleep, Oh, you're the best storyteller, Emily said, trying to butter me up. I gave her a little shake. Will you go to sleep? Emily started to lay out the conditions for the performance. And I like the way you add all sorts of details and you do different voices. Will you? I demanded. Yes, she promised. A young farmer was walking along the road, I began. Ooh, I like that one, Emily said. I knew she did, because whenever Mama told it, she always fell asleep. It was late on a fine afternoon, I started again. A summer afternoon, she corrected me. It was late on a fine summer afternoon, I said, and Emily fitted herself contentedly against me from head to toe. And he had just been to town and sold a basket full of turnips. And he was going home, Emily prompted me, and I put my hand to her head and I stroked her hair. Hey, who's telling the story? I teased. You are. Emily shifted her head to my arm, and I could feel her small body rise and fall. She seemed to feel safe now in my arms. As Emily had told me one time, you might be bossy, but you always make things okay. As Emily lay there quietly, I found myself wishing that were true. And he was going home when he heard a woman singing. He stopped dead in his tracks to listen, because her song hung like a rainbow to the ears, a rainbow that glittered and twisted through the air like a snake dancing. I kept my voice as gentle as my hand. In the mirror above the dresser, I could see Emily's eyelids begin to droop. When the song ended, it almost broke his heart. No, don't stop, he whispered. By now, the sun had disappeared over the horizon, and the trees looked as black and massive as a wall of black iron. Emily's eyes were closed, and so I kept my voice deliberately soft in the darkness. As the moon rose slowly, the woman's voice soared in greeting, singing of riding the back of the wind all the way into the night sky where the stars wriggled and shimmered like schools of fish. I closed my own eyes, feeling at peace. I forgot about the train ride and the man at the station and the men by the fence. The moonbeams reached the forest by the road, so that the edges of the leaves were like silvery smiles, and the black branches seemed to wave and point to a narrow path. Still he hesitated by the road, for the forest was the sort of strange place where anything could happen, and had happened. As I spoke, I felt myself floating into the darkness, just like the voice. He stood there, uncertainly, because he was a sensible man who always did the sensible thing. But then the beautiful voice spoke of swimming through the night and gathering the glittering stars, and he knew that he had to find the woman who sang of such things. So, taking a deep breath, he plunged off the road and down the dark, winding path. Bushes grew around a little clearing on the banks of the stream, and he hid in their shadow as he peeked through the branches. There, standing in the open, were 3 women, their faces turned towards the moon as if they were drinking its light like wine. Each was lovely, but the loveliest was the singer herself. They were dressed in silken gowns, though the farmer could not decide what color they were because they seemed to change every moment. Around the women's shoulders were cloaks of golden feathers that rippled with a soft light of their own, like the sunlight on the surface of a pond. Hardly daring to breathe, the farmer crouched in the dark forest as they danced to the one woman's triumphant song, sweeping their arms as if they were already in the night sky, fishing for stars. However, though it was dark, the night air was still muggy and uncomfortable, so the lovely singer suggested that they take off their cloaks because they were too hot, and the others were only too glad to shed the cloaks, which lay like piles of gold at their feet. And then, relieved of a hot, heavy burden, they moved with lighter, quicker steps. Finally, when they were thirsty from dancing and singing, the 3 turned to the stream. The farmer should have run away from the magical creatures, or he should have sat in the dark until they were gone. But the singing was so delightful that it made him foolish, so foolish, in fact, that he not only stayed, but he did a terrible thing. He crept out of the bushes and across the clearing. While the women's backs were turned, he snatched up the precious cloak of the lovely singer. It was still damp and warm from her dancing. Clutching it to his chest, he darted back among the bushes and hid it among the roots of a tall tree. When the women turned around, the farmer strolled boldly out of the bushes. Gazing only at the singer who had so enchanted him, he asked, "Please, what's your name?" With sharp, frightened cries, though, the women instantly bent and snatched up their cloaks. Throwing them about their shoulders, they spread their arms and immediately changed into golden kingfishers that rose, darting and weaving up the silver beams of moonlight. All of them, that is, except the singer. "Wait, wait!" she called, and held up her cloakless arms towards the sky, but her sisters were now only distant black specks against the moon. "I just want to talk," the farmer said desperately. "I don't mean you any harm." Tears in her eyes, the singer turned. "If you speak the truth, then let me leave." However, now that she stood right before him, he knew that he could not let her go. "If you marry me, I'll give it back to you." "I'm a starfisher," she pleaded. "I belong in the sky." Despite all of her arguments, the farmer coaxed and begged her to marry him, and though she did not believe the farmer, it was her only hope, so the starfisher reluctantly agreed. She accompanied the farmer to his village, where her beauty caused all the other villagers to murmur in wonder. When they were married, she pressed him for her cloak. "I'll give it back to you soon," he said guiltily. "Just stay with me a little longer." Though she now trusted him even less than before, she had no choice. She lived with the farmer, but she no longer sang or danced. She did not even look up at the sky, but always kept her eyes upon the ground. Instead, she searched for the cloak constantly. She hunted all around the house and in the fields, and even left to go back to the forest clearing. However, her husband had already removed the cloak from the original spot and hid it in a newer, better place. Eventually, she bore the farmer a daughter, and at times during those years the village would occasionally hear two birds singing sweet, lovely melodies at night. However, the birds did not sound like nightingales or any other birds the villagers had ever heard. Ashamed, the farmer would cover his ears, for he knew they were his wife's sisters calling to her to return to them. There were times when he almost kept his promise and gave her back her cloak, but he would look at his wife and know that he could never willingly give her up. And then one evening, when the sisters began a sad tune, the infant daughter tottered outside in the courtyard to listen. Lifting her head, she began to sing with them. Hastily, the farmer hurried outside to quiet her, but she had already stopped to stare up at a golden feather drifting down. Laughing, she stretched one pudgy hand up for the shining feather, but she missed it, and instead it landed on her sleeve, where it instantly turned into a spot of blood. Frightened as much by the sight of blood as by the strangeness of the event, the girl began to scream in terror, waving her arms stiffly. The farmer took the frightened child to their house, where his wife waited in the doorway. When she saw the spot of blood on her daughter's sleeve, she looked at the farmer and saw that he understood also. Her sisters had marked the child as a starfisher. Even so, the years went on. Her sisters sang, the farmer made promises, the starfisher hunted, and their daughter grew. She could sing and dance, and in her the farmer found the sweet delight that he had lost in her mother. And the farmer, afraid of the other starfishers, always kept his daughter close to home. If she ventured outside, under her father's watchful eye, the other villagers avoided the half-magical child, whispering and pointing at her. "I don't belong here," she had once complained to her mother. "Neither of us does," her mother had sighed. Finally, the starfisher saw her chance and asked her daughter to play a game with her father, and when she cheerfully agreed, the starfisher coached her carefully on what she was to do. That evening she sang and danced in the courtyard for her father, as had become their custom, but after a while she stopped. When their father asked her what was wrong, she pretended to be frightened, saying that her mother had said that she was going to leave him that evening. His eyes automatically went to a pile of rice straw, but just as quickly he looked back at his daughter and assured her that her mother was only making a bad joke. As she had been directed, she dutifully told her mother where her father had looked. That very evening, when he was asleep, the starfisher went to the heap of straw. With quiet desperation, she searched through the straw and then with her fingers clawed at dirt beneath. There, sealed inside a box, was her magical cloak. As she held it up, the feathers glimmered in the moonlight, as if finally waking after all these years. And the light woke her family, as it did all the villagers. As her daughter stumbled sleepily into the courtyard, the starfisher turned triumphantly. "I'll come back for you." Then the farmer begged as he ran out into the courtyard. The starfisher, though simply threw the cloak about her shoulders, raised her arms skyward. In the wink of an eye she had changed into a golden kingfisher that circled joyfully up towards the moon. "Wait, wait!" the farmer said as he held out his arms after her, but the bird only soared higher until she vanished from sight, And suddenly, from deep within the night sky, her sisters welcomed her gleefully in song. The villagers heard the birds only one other time, and that was when the mother returned for her daughter. And though the mother never came back, the daughter could sometimes be seen overhead at night, golden feathers shining in the moonlight as she glided over the long, winding Milky Way, skimming up the stars like a kingfisher scooping up a beakful of tiny shining fish. And then her body glowing with stars, she would sweep across the black sky like a fiery comet, back and forth, back and forth. Outside her window, the tree was still rustling. "I can hear the tree," Emily said sleepily. "But it doesn't sound scary anymore. It sounds just like the wind. Through wings," I said very softly. And the starfisher would stretch her wings and let the wind lift her up, higher and higher, on, like an endless river flowing toward the moon. And it was around then that Emily began to snore. All right, guys, that does it for that chapter of the Starfisher. Next up, we'll be reading chapter 5 the next time. And don't forget, of course, to take your quiz. All right, take care.